Uh, the,
The I liked it very much, and the whole session, last session, I missed the first one, but the
yes, yes.
last one was very informative and inspiring. So I
Oh, good.
really applaud you for the session.
Oh, good. Yes. So, another way of thinking, seeing things. So, so we have people are coming in. I see Pavan, Seema, Jain is here. Also Pavan Zaveri, great. And then Mayur, great. And Hiran is also there. We'll wait for another minute or so. Suneet is welcome, Suneet. So
Hi guys.
great. Hello.
Hey.
So Uttam Chama to everyone from us.
Shama.
Uttam
Uttam
Chama.
Chama.
Uttam Chama. So we'll wait for another minute and then start with Namokar Mantra. So great. Sujal is here too. Okay. Good. Hi, welcome Sujal. How are you? Jai
Jai
Jinain.
Shinendra.
Jai Jinain. Wonderful. Good. Glad to have you. Yes, Pavan is he's driving home. No problem. You can listen in. Don't look at the screen. So, great. So, Yogan Bhai, shall we start with Namokar mantra like we usually do, and take us through a mindful Namokar mantra, and then we will begin with our third session in talking about the Jain path to Jain way of life. So, Yogan Bhai,
Please, let's do it. If you would take a moment for the people at least who are not driving to close your eyes, a nice big smile on your face, and let's let go of all of our past and future and so on. And we're going to focus for the next 1 hour and contemplate on some of the discussions that we'll have. Take a nice deep breath, inhale, cleansing breath. Hold, hold, and very slowly exhale. And with that, let's all together do Namorka mantra. Namo Riyantanam, Namo Sattanam, Namo Airyanam, Namo Vachayanam, Namo Loy Sarasam, Eso Panchanamayaro, Manglaran
Sarvesim, Brahma
Om Shanti
Shanti. Thank you so much, Jai Jinain, everyone. So today is our third conversation, and we've talked about many things, but today we're going to talk about the AAAs. Many of you would be very familiar with this, but we're going to take a deep dive. But before we do that, I want to begin, Yogan Bhai and folks. Suppose, imagine for a moment that an alien comes and lands in your backyard. You're kind of startled at the first thought that there's an alien there. And then she comes up to you and you have a conversation with the alien. She says, take me to your leader, and you're not really sure who to take her to. But then you have a conversation to get to know her better. And then she asks this question: what are your core principles? What are your core practices? So if I were to ask this question from the group here, what are your core principles, guiding principles? What are your core practices? How would you answer those questions? Maybe anyone from the group. What do you guys, what do you think? What are, if someone asked a very personal question, How would you answer that? Thoughts?
Non-violence comes.
Creates.
Good. Non-violence comes. What else?
Welfare for all the souls.
Welfare for all the souls. Great. What else?
Being honest.
I'm sorry?
Being honest.
Honest.
Being honest.
Yes. Honesty.
Yes. Honesty.
Okay. What else?
Okay. What else?
Seeing things from multiple points of
Seeing
view,
things from multiple
so that way
points
you
of
can
view,
understand
so
their
that way you can
all
understand
perspectives.
their all perspectives.
Wonderful.
Manoj,
I'm
there's an
just getting
echo.
echo.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Is it from
Why
your
don't you
end?
come in and out?
Is it
See,
from
Dr. Jain, Dr. Jain, are you using two devices?
It's not from my end.
It's
Yogan
not
bhai, is it from your end?
No, is anybody else using two devices in the same room?
Using two devices in the same room?
Maybe Preeti
It's
Ben?
coming from Ashish's phone.
Oh. Okay, Ashish?
Just a minute. Just a
Preeti
minute.
Ben?
Give me a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be from your device.
No,
Yes.
it's the same.
Actually, it
think-
went away, I think.
Yes, it went away.
The aliens are not
The
spying on us
aliens are
anymore.
gone. Okay. The aliens are gone. Okay, so
Sorry about that.
oh, no problem. So in brief, what the aliens, they make us think about what is guiding us. We don't think day to day. So the big picture again, as we talked about, last week we talked about the Jain philosophy. Today we're going to be spending a lot of time on Jain principles. And then next week we'll be talking about Jain practices. And what over years and years we have learned and talked about is that we can take, if we believe in Jainism, our principles and put them into buckets, an easy bucket of triple A's. And what today we want to talk about is, where do these triple A's come from? Historically, how are they in depth making sense for us today? And then how do they, again, guide us to our basic practices? At the end of the day, we know our goal is basically to attain moksha, equanimity and happiness. And in the worksheets, in the learning lessons, we've talked a bit about that. And Yogan bhai, the triple A's, where do they come from? What do you think?
So as you may recall, in our last discussion, we did talk about Dr. Natmal Tatia, who did the translation of Uma Swati's Tattva Sutra. And in that, we see the triple A's. And you see, in Jainism, a lot of the things that we talk about could be beautifully bucketized in these three core principles. And we feel, and I think a lot of us feel, that these are the ones that should be part of our core and should be the ones that should come out anytime we have a conversation, anytime we think about Jainism and Jain core practices. So this is what the introduction, in the introduction of Tattva Sutra, you can see that there was, the first few words are non-violence, non-absolutism, and non-possession.
The central
And beautiful
theme.
definitions of these three, right, Manoj?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Natmal Tatia ji said was that for thousands of years, what Tattva Sutra is coming to, it's funneling in, are these triple A's: non-violence, non-absolutism, and non-possessiveness. And then he goes to define what is non-violence and what it does. It strengthens the autonomy of the life of every being, autonomy of every living being. What does non-absolutism do? It does strengthens the autonomy of our thought of every individual. What does non-possessiveness, non-possession, strengthens the interdependence of all existence. If you feel that every soul is autonomous, you will never trample on its right to live. If you feel every person is a thinking person, you will not trample on his or her thoughts. If you feel that you own nothing and no one, you will not trample on the planet. In the 2nd century, think about this, 2,000 years ago, when the Jain philosopher monk Umaswati wrote the Tattva Sutra, these principles were the only way to global peace. And today, this is even more the case. These are the only values that can save humanity from the deadly acts of war, economic exploitation, and environmental destruction. Now, just take a moment to think how much that thought of Ahimsa Nikantva Parigraha started so many years ago and is so relevant today. And today, what we want to do is to extract it so we can better understand it. So while all of that is there is a unifying value in all of this. And that value is equity. But first, we must understand what that is. So Yogenbhai, tell us, what does this diagram, this picture tell us of what is going on here?
So normally I would be watching the Patriots, but they lost today, which is okay. I would not want to be on the left in the wheelchair and someone is doling out equally those blocks that I could stand on.
Right.
That
so
would
that's
not
equality.
help me at all.
Right. So that's equality,
right? Trying to make sure that we get equality to everybody. What we really need to see is from that individual's viewpoint, that individual's strength and weaknesses, that individual's background, to make sure that there's fairness and justice. And that is equity. And the core of the AAAs, the underlying foundation is equity as you go through each of these.
Okay, so what is equity in Ahimsa then? It is the all life has right to live. There is equity in souls. What is equity in Anekantvad? That all perspectives are respected. And we'll come into real depth on that. And where is equity in Aparigraha? That our basic needs are met, right?
And
So
different people have different basic needs based on their background, based on a lot of their things, predisposition, their genetics. We need to be aware and sensitized as we even think about a Aparigraha or Anekantvad or Ahimsa.
So I want to pause here for a moment and have people ask us questions or even comment on this and what they think. Ahimsa, two-part. So what we're proposing in this conversation is following, that the central theme of Jainism is Ahimsa Anekantvad Parigraha, and the central value of Ahimsa Anekantvad Parigraha is equity. What do people think of that? Is that consistent with your values? Is that consistent with Jain values? Is that consistent with something that we should be pursuing as Jains in North America, in India, anywhere else? What do people think of that? Maybe Bipin Bhai or Preeti Bhen? Yes, Sunit, please.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure if you're sharing something. I'm seeing a blank screen. I don't know if that's just me or others can see it.
I'm sharing. Can you see it, guys?
There's a beautiful image that once one sees, it never forgets.
Sunit, you're not able to see the screen?
Okay, it might be my issue. I'll log back in. But my question,
Bipin Bhai, can you see the screen?
Yeah, it looks like others can see. I see from
Yeah, all can see. All can see.
It's my issue.
Okay.
But the question, I love the 3 A's. When I try to explain it to especially non-Jains, the biggest question that comes up, I'd love to hear your viewpoint, is around Anekantavad, which, I love the multiplicity of viewpoints. And they often ask, that's great to look at both sides of the points, but how do you make a decision then?
Yep. We're going to spend a fair amount of time discussing that. when we did the India version of that, we got a lot of questions. So we're gonna definitely going to cover that, Suneet.
Yeah.
How do we
Because
make
if
a
you look at the
decision?
majority of the conflicts in the world that are going on, right? It's a lot of, because of course, a lot of it is religion. People have different points of view. Challenges. How do you rationalize that?
Absolutely.
And I just want to go back to Natmal Tatia's words, strengthen the autonomy, right? Where we talked about that. And you can see that when we do that, equity happens, when we can strengthen the autonomy of people. So I just want to make sure that that people do relate this part about strengthening the autonomy. But in any case, let's move on, Manoj.
So any comments?
And let's dive deep into each of these separately.
Okay.
And then we'll bring it all together.
So it's really important to take a minute and look at the evolution of ahimsa, anikantvad, and aparigraha. So if you look at the evolution ahimsa, where did the thought of ahimsa begin in human culture? And it really look at it is over 3,000 years ago in the Shraman tradition, right? And then we know that there were similar thought processes going on in the Indus Valley culture. The Rig Vedas had different thoughts of it, right? But they did mention ahimsa as a word there. They were very much into ritual sacrifice. And then we know that the major steps came with Mahavir Bhagwan when he used ahimsa to central theme of Jainism. And then we know that Gandhiji took that idea. In the Western tradition, Pythagoras was also vegetarian. He had those ideas not to kill for food. Jesus Christ was the same idea, unconditional love and forgiveness. Very ahimsic perspective he brought. And others, Emerson, Lincoln, bringing different aspects of nonviolence into, and certainly Martin Luther King. It's important to know the historical evolution of ahimsa as well as what the religious tradition says as well. So what has happened with ahimsa? So we're going to take the next 5-7 minutes and see the different facets of ahimsa. Why? Because it will help us better understand this principle. And then all of the practices, the day-to-day practices that extract from this. So Yogan Bhai, what do you see on the left and right on these two graphs?
Well, if I look at the media and news and all of that, I would think that the violence is on the rise.
Yeah, I agree.
However, we know, and you look at from this data, hunger, disease, and war were significant contributors. Most people never lived beyond 30, 40, 50 years old when we were tribes and fighting each other and so on, as you may think back.
Right. So
violence has come down significantly as we've been able to tame hunger, disease, and war. And Manoj, on the right-hand side, this is probably one of the saddest things that we're seeing in our modern world today.
With meat consumption.
Meat consumption is going out of control. But actually, I'm hoping that some of the meat substitutes will put a dent on this curve. But let us only hope that. But maybe we can help towards that.
Sure. So that is one aspect of how ahimsa is being practiced in day to day. But what is ahimsa when we have to look at it at the core end? Is at one aspect, it is not harming. And it is not harming through our thoughts, speech, or action. And at the other end, it is helping, right? It is to live and help live. That is a motto, what ahimsa is also about. So it is non-violence, is not just a negation of violence. It is also helping, and helping through our thought, speech, and action. That's how we must be thinking. We're doing all of this to look at to deeper level of ahimsa. Also, in Jainism, when ahimsa is talked about, it is really talked about where it comes from, which is the root cause, intentions. There's actual, which is on the surface, there's attempts, and then there is intentions. So these are different types of non-violence and violence that happens. And in Jain religion, we really focus in on intentions. And then those ways we can reduce the violence, it's life force that we evaluate each being. So plants, we look at lifespan, physical power, respirations, touch, taste, smell, the senses. And plants are at the level at say 4. Humans are at level 10. We want to minimize the violence towards those which have greater life force. So that is how we need to be thinking about violence. Also, violence is also an element where it's necessary at times. And what Jain religion says, that violence in daily activity, in keeping your house clean, going to work, like violence in occupation, and in self-defense. So Yogen Bhai,
And then Manoj, well, one of the areas that we missed out is also violence in communication. Now, all of these require communication with not only our family members, but others, now including emails and others. There's a huge amount of modes of communication that have come about, and we need to be cognizant of those as well, obviously.
Right. And there's a very a wonderful story in our Jain tradition. There's someone who is very hungry, and there are different men who want to eat mangoes from a tree, and then what they do is one says, I want to chop the whole tree down and eat the mangoes. One says, I want to chop the branch. One says, I want to pluck the fruit. Another says, I just want to pick up the mangoes on the ground and eat it. Different levels of violence that one does, even to a plant. And so our tradition, Jain tradition, has lots of deep-seated stories. But how do we take this? How do we take this and put it into perspective of today? So what does this graph, this illustration tell you, Yogen Bhai? How do you see this whole idea of violence and ahimsa, non-violence?
We've always talked about we are the soul, we are not the body. I mean, that's how a lot of Jains come from how they've been brought up to think. But really, our body is very important, and non-violence towards the body, which eventually is non-violence towards the self or the soul, is something that we have to be very much aware of. And things have changed so much from the past. Stress appears to be the highest cause of violence that we do to our body. And to mitigate that, we can do a lot of things like yoga, meditation, exercise. And then obviously what we're eating and we're devouring is not as well thought out. And obviously other habits that we have cultivated over time. Right. All of those things are now so much part of hinsa that we might do to ourselves.
Right. So the first step in our tradition is saying you have to do non-violence. Who do you don't want to do violence against is the self, and not by not harming ourselves by smoking alcohol and drugs. So, as a story, I was at YJA a couple of months ago, and we were talking about why Jains should not be smoking or doing drugs or alcohol. It really has to do with this violence towards the self. If we believe in ahimsa, then it is violence towards our body that we do, right? And so forth. Now, I want to expand this idea further, but then I want to get opinion and thoughts from other people on what they think of this whole concept of ahimsa towards the self and others. We talked about yes, Sejal. Yeah.
Sorry. I have something very, this really hit me hard, especially ahimsa towards ourselves. I had a discussion during this Paryushan Parva with someone who kind of had a little, another Jain fellow who told me, like, I am a Jain practitioner, but I do not follow a strict Jainism. like I do drink once in a while, or that I do not really think that Jainism is stopping me or has told me to not drink, or like all these things sometimes, where we get to when we socialize and time to time,
Sure.
we get
Yeah.
such questions, or we have to basically, you don't party just because you are a Jain. And that's where this is really interesting way to not way, but
Yes.
to understand the real meaning of why am I not doing it.
Exactly. In fact, I'll tell you this, just when we did this conversation with the India group, like we're doing here with the US group, we had similar group we're doing with the India group. And my cousin, who was on the call with us, told me that she found this slide to be transformative for her. She came up, she said, now I see why we shouldn't be doing smoking, alcohol, and drugs, because it fits in. I am doing harm to my own self. I'm doing harm to my own body. And so yes, that makes sense. Stress, workaholic, if we work too much, if we don't exercise, if we don't eat right, we are causing harm. And it all fits into the circle of ahimsa. And so that circle of ahimsa, not doing violence to the self, not doing violence towards family and friends. So ahimsa towards having friendship, service, forgiveness, not towards enemies, not towards animals, and not doing violence to the environment. And so that is what our religion teaches us. And so other people's thoughts and comments on this whole idea of the circle of nonviolence.
And let's give people a 30 seconds to look at this. This is probably one of the most beautiful rendering of the expansiveness of how we should be thinking about ahimsa.
Yeah. And where does it make sense? Is this consistent with your views? This is how we are interpreting when we look at the Tattva Sutra. And there are shlokas, right? And we will go through in the 9th chapter, a shlok that talks about not using alcohol, a shlok that talks about doing meditation, shlok that talks about fasting and certainly eating well, shlok that talks about service, forgiveness. All of these are part and parcel.
So Manoj, now the question comes up is, we see this map, we see a lot of the elements in this map that we should be aware of in our lives. How do we transform ourselves, not only to be more sensitive, but to reduce our overall hinsa and the many ripples that happen?
Absolutely. So I think once we realize where we are, then we need to say that if I am a person who is angry, you don't have to be enraged angry, but how do I get to forgiveness? If I have some hatred, how do I get to understanding? If I have some level of deceit, can I become straightforward? Our religion says absolutely. This is how it happens. First, with self-awareness, then with self-reflection, then with apologies, saying sorry, then reconciling, not holding grudges, and then you reach a state with forgiveness. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. It has many other aspects to it, but this is a transformation that happens. How does hatred become understanding? Self-reflection, also criticizing the actions of the individual, not the person, and then overcoming our own insecurities. We need to be working to overcome those, and then recognizing the harm, seeing other people view, anekantvad, hatred to understanding. And then deceit, how does that change? Again, all of these things, self-awareness, self-reflection, listening to another's views, anekantvad, attitude change, and then creating a new habit, feeling relieved in not lying, straightforwardness. So there are transformative ways that our religion guides us towards so that we go from that. Other thoughts and comments from the group? Vipin Bhai, your thoughts on some of these, the two major aspects of ahimsa, before we take a deep dive into Anekantvad. You're on mute, so go ahead. Yeah, you're on mute, Vipin Bhai, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. As far as ahimsa is concerned, we live in an environment of some level of hinsa. Our own bodies harbor billions of bacteria, viruses, and we breathe, we walk around in such an environment. So total ahimsa is not possible. So basically, in my way of thinking, minimizing of hinsa should be the guiding principle. Right. Even in a COVID era, some places where we had in Chicago temple, Jain temple, where pujaris had COVID, so they had to fumigate even Gambhara and those things. But those are kind of must type of hinsa. So we have to make it relative to our lives of how do we reduce hinsa.
Absolutely. And that's why we have to take, there's Nishchay perspective, which is, and Vyavhar perspective in Jainism, Nishchay and Vyavhar. And we live in a world with Vyavhar where we have to deal with day-to-day life. We're not an ascetic and a monk and in doing monk life. So yes, we have to do that very much so. Great. Let us
just
now...
one quick comment on that.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Yes.
If you go back on the slide, what I really like about this slide is if you look at like what's being taught in many of the schools and even in the work environment in the US. In schools, they call it social emotional learning. In the work environment, they call it EQ, emotional quotient. And what I like about this slide is all of those things start with the first step, which is being self-aware.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. Self-aware. Absolutely. Okay. Let's now go into a deeper topic, Anekantvad, and what it means. And how does one better understand Anekantvad? It is respecting, seeking, and acceptance of multiple views. Now, there is one misunderstanding of Anekantvad, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then, Suneet, I know that you had a couple of questions on this, and then we'll try to address those as well. But let us better understand the evolution of Anekantvad and then the theory of Anekantvad. In fact, when we looked at the literature, we really didn't find Anekantvad very much in scriptures or in other places. It is Mahavira's response to the disciples that's showing multiple perspective. In 500, you look at the scriptures, in Jain scriptures, there's very much in there that there's there. And then certainly the evolution in the Tattva Sutra being there, and then in the Buddhist as well as some of the Jain tradition. And Mahatma Gandhi also used the word for himself. So not much there. First and foremost in Anekantvad, we understand is that there are multiple perspectives on a situation. You can begin with the most simple one, which is an absolute. This is the way things are. But then you can have a tolerant view. You can have a dialogue. You can have open-mindedness or an acceptance. So there are different ways of looking at a situation. There's a continuum. What we as individuals need to know is where we stand on these, on a particular situation. How do we take this?
Different objects, different things in life, towards different people, we're at different levels, even in these views. It's not absolute for everybody that you are of a tolerant view, for example.
Sure. So I'm going to take the next 5 minutes, Yogan Bhai and everyone, and go
Yes,
into this.
you wrote a beautiful booklet on this subject, and it is a beautiful explanation of Anekantvad that people will enjoy.
So there are 3 slides that after this that we will go through, and it will help you better understand Anekantvad. So if this is a self, this is others, and then imagine that these are the 3 ways, 3 perspectives. An ordinary way of looking at something, say Anekantvad person's looking at something, and then absolutist, the red perspective. And then they're looking at something, a reality, maybe a glass half filled with water. Now let us put all of this together. Now let's take an ordinary perspective, not thinking very much about something, but someone is looking at it ordinarily. Imagine that there is a glass half filled with water. An ordinary person could say, okay, it's half filled, half empty, whatever. Others may have a different perspective. Some may have a very absolutist, this is only half filled. Someone say understanding, someone others. While people have different perspectives of the truth, the relationship from that person to others is what concerns us the most. Why does that concern us? Because that is where Anekantvad has its greatest impact. That relationship between the self and then the others. When in an ordinary perspective, it doesn't really matter. That relationship, this person is not having a strong view on this, and it could be of not great significance. However, things change dramatically when one takes an absolutist view. If I say this is only half filled glass of water, and others also take a different, this is half empty, or another perspective, what that does is the relationship between the self and the other gets into a conflict. So if one person, if we have a absolute perspective, absolutist perspective, that creates a conflict, which then leads to violence, conflict, argument, war, disrespect, lack of dialogue, lack of tolerance, closed-mindedness, rejection. So you can see the impact of an absolutist perspective. Now let me take the solution to that. Suppose one decides, I want to take an Anekantavadi perspective to the situation. I take self looking at a glass of water. I think it could be half filled. I think it could be half empty. Then others may have varying perspective. But what happens then is the relationship between the self and others is always respectful. Even if they have an absolutist view, then you are able to have a perspective. And that is a path to happiness, equanimity, and moksha. Respect, dialogue, tolerance, open-mindedness, and acceptance.
So,
I'm going to take a pause here and have people ask questions and comment on the 3 perspectives, right? Ordinary, absolutist, and Anekantavadi perspective, and why those perspectives matter and how they lead to conflict versus leading to open-mindedness and happiness. Yes. Questions? Yogan Bhai, please.
So one question that always comes up when we have these discussions is that, do I have to believe the other perspectives? I have my perspective, but someone has a different perspective. Do I have to agree with that? Question 1.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Question number 2, is there absolute truth that I may be missing?
But you have to respect their perspective. If someone eats meat and they believe that eating meat is the right thing for them, and they believe it's the only way to do things, and they have very absolute on that, then you can have understanding and respect for that and their view. You do not have to agree. Anekantvad does not say that all perspectives are right. Anekantvad does not say that you have to agree. This is the single most misunderstood fact about Anekantvad. And I see Sujal is saying, agreeing to that. Go ahead, Sujal, go ahead. You comment on that point.
Yes, absolutely. I observe this so many times in my practice as a coach. I'm a nutrition coach, and I help people, when it is their weight loss, fat loss journeys through vegetarian diet only. And I get to see this very often when the selection for protein sources, mostly that's what that's the triggering factor when there are arguments, like plant-based sources are not right, or animal-based sources are easy to absorb and things like that. So yeah, I try to just I do not like to get into these arguments, but I just respect, and
Right.
even though I'm still gonna put my point
Sure.
of view.
Yep, absolutely.
Manoj,
And you know what? I also, as professionally, that's what I do as a doctor, right? When patients come to me and said, I don't want a vaccine, doc, because it's going to kill me. I'm going to grow a horn if I, get the vaccine. They don't say that literally, but yes, that's what they feel like. That's what's going to happen to them, that they're going to die if they. And I disagree with them, but I respect them for their perspective. And that is what Anekantvad tells us to do. Yes.
So Manoj, today is 9/11 anniversary, a very sad day. It is be so hard for many of us, many people, to respect the views of those people that caused this, not to mention hundreds of wars and crusades and so on that have happened in the past.
Yeah. So I can say this. The acts were completely unjustifiable. We know that, horrific acts. But if you come back and look at why they did what they did, and this is again not justified, but if you look at those individuals felt that their culture, that their way of life was being threatened, was being insulted, invaded by the Western culture. And that forced them to act in such a way. Now, no, there is no direct at the point solution that Anekantvad will find a solution. Ahimsa, Anekantvad, Aparigara are long-term root cause solutions. That is what we need to understand. This is not active medicine that is injected at the point of conflict when it's happening. This is so that conflicts and major wars do not happen. This is what we have to be doing over decades with bringing our children up and helping them understand this perspective.
And Manoj, so a very good point. So if these dialogues had happened many years ago, perhaps 9/11 would not have happened.
Absolutely. If those individuals,
that's another way to think about it.
If those individuals were having this dialogue in school with their teachers, if Anekantvad was a practice that was a principle that was promulgated in different traditions and was brought up again and again in conversations, and even we as Jains don't bring it up sufficiently enough and don't use our own tools for the benefit of our community. We may pay lip service to it in many ways, but again, we don't do it. So I'll pause with that, and then we go into the Aparigraha conversation, which is even more interesting. But I know your thoughts, Mayur, or others who are on the phone, and others.
My thought is, or my question is, applying Anekantvad principles is definitely important, but how can you balance Anekantvad with, say, if at work you have to be assertive as well? So what is the right approach or the balance to get the job done?
Right. So I would say the following, that first, that when you have to criticize, you criticize the actions of individuals, don't criticize the person. Separate the action from person. Listen to that individual, respect their view, and then deviate and say, this is where we disagree. This is where, and you have to take, you are responsible for the project. You are responsible for something. And you say, this is the way that we will do it. I have had and taken time to listen to you. Now you don't have to spend 3 hours listening, not even 3 minutes listening, maybe 15 to 20 seconds, enough to get the idea. And that's what's important, to take that time.
And we're going to talk about this more next week. We'll cover this subject. It's a very good point, very important point. You spend 8 hours a day at work.
Yep.
Okay.
And how to do this.
Time is running out.
We know the story. We know the stories of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Now we get into the third core principle of Jainism, non-possessiveness, aparigraha. And it is really core conversation of the difference between our needs and our wants. So how does one put this into perspective? That there is really a continuum. There are basic needs, food, water, shelter. They're necessities. There are comforts, maybe like air conditioning and others. There are wants, right? I want the latest iPhone. Then there is greed, right? I just don't want, one car, but I want a dozen cars. I just don't want a couple of pairs of shoes, but I want 50 different latest styles of shoes. There is a sense, right? Relation to nonviolence and non-absolutism, all of this impacts the aparigraha. And aparigraha comes from a deep-seated cause. And it is in Hindi, rag and dvesh. It is that whole idea of attachment. And so let us take a moment and see what we are attached to. What parigraha, what is the parigraha that we have? What we consider to be ours. We know that the true self is the Atma. And Atma has many things around it. We have the body, we have people, we have our emotions, we have our materials, our content. So our soul is attached to our body, our age, our physical strength, beauty. We are attached to the mind, our ego, anger, love. We are attached to other people, family, friends, even enemies we're attached. And then to materials, our food, technology, vehicles. We have multiple layers of attachment. That is very important to recognize. One day, we will have to detach. What Jainism is saying, recognize this level of attachment and be prepared for detachment. And the religion helps us prepare. And we'll talk about 8 practices which will help us prepare for that detachment. Now,
and just attachment also has ramifications where to acquire those things, we may lean towards violence. We may lean towards absolutism in our viewpoint. And so it also has huge impact on our other 2 core principles. But let us take a moment to realize that the possessiveness in our daily life is huge. In all dimensions, there are potential for possessiveness. Even, for example, our knowledge. Many times we're hoarding our knowledge and not sharing and mentoring and guiding others, right? We know about eating and even the way we spend our time, that also is a huge asset. So I think it's important for us to understand the many, many dimensions of possessiveness. It's just not wealth. It's just not one or two things. It permeates so many parts of our lives.
Great. So let's take a minute and talk about your thoughts on non-possessiveness and aparigraha. What do people think? What are some questions that you have on this topic. Thoughts, comments, questions on aparigraha?
So Manoj bhai, Yogen bhai
Yes.
just talked about possessiveness of knowledge. So that reminds me of one of my art teacher. Like
Yes.
she used to say one sentence that nothing is yours until you give it away. Okay. And that like stuck my mind, that whenever you have some information or you have some knowledge that someone comes and asks you, like some people have a habit of not sharing recipes or not sharing what they know, right? Because it is something which is very personal and, you know, they want to keep it to themselves. So this is something I just wanted to share, that nothing is yours until you give it away. Because when you give
Yeah.
it away, it is like, okay, she or he taught me this or whatever, right?
Yeah. I think that whole reflection of what is mine, what is ours, is really important. And we get lost. And it is our ego which drives that me, my conversation.
And
Good.
Praveen said in his chat, it is not how many things you have, but how you feel about these. You know, me, mine, it's this hoarding. That has far more intensive aparigraha than you can have lots of things and still be detached from them. Anyways, I think we all understand a lot of those fundamentals. Let us go on to this, please.
Sure.
One
So,
question, previous
please.
slide,
Yeah.
at the very bottom, I know that for the wealth, donate a percentage of wealth for the spiritual benefits. I know that Jainism doesn't have a number and all that stuff or guidelines. Wanted your thoughts on that, because it's very subjective, it's very personal, and you know, in most of the other religions they have a guideline. So I don't know what your thought is on that, or if any of the scriptures indicate anything on that.
So Mayur, I took a shot in the Jain Way of Life book on the guidelines because we didn't have any. And I saw my friend, Christian friend, who would donate 10% of his income type to the church. He had 3 daughters in college, or 2 daughters in college and 1 going. Didn't matter. And I was just completely floored by his consistency in giving. And I said, you know what? Compared to that, I'm nowhere. And Jains are probably not anywhere either. And should we think about some guidelines? I'll share that part of the chapter with you later.
Yeah, and I agree. I think if our Muni Maharajas said a number, maybe 5%, maybe 10%, maybe 3%. I know in the Muslim tradition, there's numbers. I know that in so many other traditions, there are numbers. And people donate. People feel good about doing it. And
It's not just so volunteering too.
The volunteer part too, exactly. Swami Narayan Group does tremendous service. In our tradition, we don't have that at the moment, but that doesn't mean we cannot change. It is by what we will value. And all of this comes to the very point, which is what practices do we want to derive from our principles? And so next week, we will have a deep dive into the following 24 practices. From the 8 come from ahimsa, towards non-violence towards others, and non-violence towards the self. We will do a deep dive on each one of this. And what we will ask the following question in those practices. We will ask, say, the practice of vegetarian or vegan diet. What principle does it come from? Ahimsa. And what does it mean? Non-violence towards our own body, both physically, emotionally. And what it means, less violence. Scriptures, what scripture talks about this? And the exact quote from that scripture. Most of it will be coming from Tattva Sutra. And then we'll go to what we know of today. And this is where I think one of the important things that Jains in North America can bring to Jains throughout the world is the scientific benefits of a Jain life, Jain way of life. There are many benefits based on science. We just need to look at them and practice them. So next week, we will talk about all of these practices and what are the scientific evidence benefits from meditation, from humility, from scripture reading. What is the scientific evidence says from all of those, both in our day-to-day lives, in our professional life, in our social life as well. And then we will talk more about the Jain practices in aparigraha, that Jain practices that come from aparigraha. We talked about that, balancing needs and
I wanted
wants
to stress to folks that, you know, we discussed philosophy, we discussed our core principles, but if we can't put them into practices,
yeah,
in a very natural way, without getting stressed about it, that happens only when we're able to change our behavior, and knowledge is important. And some of the core of these practices, which are, you know, in science, which are in studies that are being done in modern psychology, have come about over the past 10 to 20 to 30 years. And they perfectly align with what we've seen and read in our scriptures.
Great. So as we close, I do want to share with you the Jain journey sheet that everyone's completing, and also say that next week we will be doing more of these, the depth in the practices as well. But any questions or comments from the group as we finish up today? If you can see my screen, we have talked about, this is not just a conversation, but this is really about self-reflection. This is a simple sheet. You can watch a video, 3 minutes, of how to fill out for self-reflection, 3 things that you're seeking in your personal life. If you haven't done this, I know many of you have, and received a call from Vidika. Vidika has been our person who has been engaging many of you in conversations, helping you fill the sheet out. It's very simple to do. It's a drop down, you choose, and then you get a score that helps you see a mini reflection score where you're at. Also in doing.
How do you count that score? You rate in 1 to 5,
1 to 5.
And then you just add up?
It automatically adds that up, correct. Okay. And it scales from a total score of 100. It calibers that, multiplies it by a factor so that the top score is 100. And you know, it's not for a self, you know, inflation if you're doing really well, but it's a way for self-reflection. And then there are more deeper questions, the longer, which takes about 15 to 20 minutes. And then to share this with others in the family, and you know, begin to know and reflect the Jain values as well. Then we have a conversation about happiness. We've had this in our last discussion. You can do a, say, on a scale of 1 to 5, where you are on happiness. You prioritize. Are you looking for moksha? And you can say, well, not a high priority at this time, but yes, tranquility, simple joys, yes, maybe that's a priority. And then we can look at present, how happy are you in relation to your health, affection, security, significance, and equanimity, with definitions here. And then lastly, your priorities. This is again all of the practices that we have shown are on this side, what is most priority for me today? So it is a vegetarian diet. And then what is there? Being intoxicant free, that's important. And then I really feel for me that a practice of, say, living a stress-free life. And so I can take a moment and I can say, if I'm fully achieved a vegetarian vegan diet, yes. Intoxicant free, yes. But not a stress-free life. Haven't reached that. Haven't reached all of these, and these are priorities. And like this, you can put a score and do self-reflection. So with that, I'll pause, answer questions, and then we will complete our conversation for today and finish. And Suneet put a question, absolutism equals extremist. You're absolutely right. Yep. That's how we see absolutism and all. So good, greatly appreciate a lot of your comments. Please take time and do the self-reflection exercise. And we have reached our hour. So any last comments? And then Yogan Bhai, if you want to complete with a prayer.
Sure. Any questions, comments?
Yes, lots of great content. Thank you for putting it all together.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Great. So
right, good.
let's take a moment. Again, you guys know the drill. A nice smile on your face, which will stay for all of this week until we meet again next week. Your back straight. Take a nice deep breath. Inhale. Hold. And exhale. Let's just do the Morka mantra together. Om Namo Arihantara. Namo Siddhara. Namo Arihantara. Namo Vajrayana. Namo
Sasana.
Eso
Yeso
Panchana.
Panchana.
Sabba
Sabapao Parash.
Mangala.
Om
Om
Shanti.
Shanti.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And I want to thank Edwin Rodriguez, who is here with us from India, and he is our IT support person. Edwin, thank you so much for making it possible. I know it's 2:30, it's 3:30 in the morning in India time, and Edwin has been with me for over 15 years working together on most of the stuff that you're seeing is Edwin's work. So Edwin, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.